function composition in JavaScript. Starting with an example without function composition, and then we will see how we can do the same thing using function composition. We will write a function that will calculate the savings of a person based on his income and expenses. So here we have three variables. Income is the income of the person, rent is the rent of the house, and food is the cost of his food. Let's create two functions. One is for deduct rent from income and another is deduct food from income. Deduct rent will be accepted as income as parameter and deduct food will also accept as a parameter income. Now we have two appropriate functions. Let's define a variable for rent. So let's call it after rent. We'll use deduct rent and pass income. So now this after rent variable will store the amount which remains after deducting rent, as well as we will also create another variable called after food. One thing is notice in after food variable we will use deduct food function, but we will not pass the income as an argument. We will pass the amount of remains value after deducting rent, which is stored in our after rent variable. So now if we console log the after food variables, we will able to get the remaining savings for this person after calculating income and expense. Now let's see how we can do the same thing using function composition. First, we will start with the same variable and an easiest way. To get in this method, we will pass the nested functions as arguments to the variable and it will return the value. Here we first call the deduct rent function with the income variable as argument and it returned a value. Then we passed the return value to the deduct food function as argument and it returned the value. And finally we store the return value in the savings variable and it returns our expected result. So now if you say console log, you will able to see its return 300, which is our expected result, which is the most easiest way to write function composition, but we can also write the same thing in different way using compose function. Compose function is a function which accepts multiple functions as arguments. Here we have a function called compose which accepts multiple functions as arguments. Inside the compose function, we have another function called inner which accepts a argument. Inside the inner function, we have a variable called result which will store the result of the functions. Then we have a for loop which will loop through the functions and call them one by one. And finally, we will return the result variable and as well as the inner function. Now we can use the compose function to compose the deduct rent and deduct food functions together as parameter. Let's first create a savings variable. Here in savings variable, we first the deduct food and deduct rate function as arguments to the compose function. And as we know, it returned a function which we stored in savings variable. Then we can call the savings function with the income variable as argument, and it will return our desired result. In the compose function, it will first call the deduct food function and then it will call deduct rent function. With the result of deduct food function as argument, here we have a problem because in compose function by nature it should call functions from right to left, but in our case it's calling the functions from left to right. So we need to fix this problem. To fix this problem, we can modify the loop execution order inside the compose function so that it will call from right to left. So now that it's working fine, but we can optimize the code, the compose function also. We can use the reduce right array method. It will reduce the array from right to left and return a single value so that we don't have to use for loop anymore. Reduce right method is a method which accepts a callback function as argument and returns a single value. The callback function accepts two arguments. The first argument is accumulator and the second argument is current value. The callback function will be called for each element of the array and it will return a single value. In our case, we are calling the functions one by one and returning a single value. So the code will be much cleaner and easier to read using reduce right method. So that's all about function composition. Thank you for watching. See you in next video.